He was just walking home when police drew their guns. But the moment he whispered 5 words, everything stopped. What did he say that made armed officers lower their weapons and stand in silence? This isn't just a story about race or uniforms. It's a story about brotherhood, sacrifice, and the power of memory. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rooftops of a quiet suburb in Charlotte, North Carolina. Casting long shadows across the pavement, Malcolm Briggs, a tall black man, in his mid-30s, was walking home from work, dressed in plain work boots, dusty jeans, and a faded U.S. Army hoodie. He carried a small bag with groceries. His posture was upright, his walk unhurried. But in a flash, everything changed. A screech of tires, a yell, "Hands up, don't move." 3 police cruisers boxed him in on the corner of 8th and Kennedy. Doors flew open, and officers jumped out with weapons drawn, faces hard with suspicion. Red and blue lights bathed Malcolm in a disorienting blur. Confused, he stopped immediately and raised both hands. "Sir, what's going on?" he asked, steady but cautious. "Get on the ground, now," barked one officer, Eskidi Kowalski. His Glock aimed center mass. The other officers mirrored him, forming a semicircle of loaded tension. "I just got off work," Malcolm said, keeping still. "I live 3 blocks from here. We got a report of a suspicious male matching your description. Bag could be stolen. Step back, hands where we can see them." Then came the silence. It wasn't fear that froze Malcolm. It was something deeper, memory. His eyes caught the badge on the chest of Officer Dunlop, a younger officer who looked unsure, sweat beading on his brow. His name clicked something in Malcolm's mind. Malcolm didn't move. Instead, with slow breath and eyes still locked with the officers, he spoke just 5 soft words. "Echo 94, Freedom Hill." The officers stiffened. Officer Dunlop lowered his weapon slightly. "What did you just say?" he asked. "Echo 94, Malcolm repeated. "Freedom Hill, August 2010. Operation Iron Dawn." There was a stunned pause. Eskiti Kowalski blinked in disbelief. That was not a phrase any civilian would know, not unless they'd been there. "You knew Sergeant Miller?" Dunlop asked, his voice faltering now, weapon trembling. "Knew him. He saved my life," Malcolm said. "We bled together in a trench in Kandahar. He called me Doc Briggs. I was the combat medic." Eskiti Kowalski slowly lowered his weapon. "You were the one he radioed for before he died," the sergeant whispered. "He told me about you, said if I ever met you, I'd know." The mood shifted. The aggression faded into silence. Officer Dunlop holstered his weapon and stepped forward. "He talked about you like you were a legend, said you patched up 6 guys while taking fire and never asked for thanks." "I didn't want thanks," Malcolm said, quietly. "Just peace." There were no more questions. The groceries Malcolm dropped were gently picked up by one of the officers. They didn't arrest him. Instead, Eskidi Kowalski extended a hand, a gesture that felt heavier than any salute. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rough with emotion. "We judged a man by his skin and not by his scars." Malcolm took the hand. "You're not the first, but maybe you'll be the last." As Malcolm walked away, the sun now nearly gone, the officers stood still, haunted by a ghost they all loved, Sergeant Miller, and awakened by a man who carried his memory, not as a shield, but as a bond. Behind them, the street grew quiet. Again, but something had changed, because sometimes it only takes a single whispered memory to disarm a lifetime of fear. The news of the incident spread quietly at first, just a few murmurs within the precinct. Officer Dunlop couldn't shake it. That night, he went home and opened a locked drawer. Inside was a weathered photo of his brother in arms, Sergeant Daniel Miller, smiling in full uniform, arms slung round a younger man in a medic patch, Malcolm Briggs. He hadn't remembered the face at first. It had been over a decade. But now, the image wouldn't leave him. Neither would the words Malcolm spoke. The next day, Dunlop returned to the corner of 8th and Kennedy with flowers and left them under the old rusted street sign. He called it the place where the war ended again. Meanwhile, Malcolm tried to move on, but something tugged at him. For years, he had avoided the VA halls, the parades, and the memorials. Too many ghosts, too much pain. But this time it was different. He visited the local VFW hall on the following weekend. For the first time in 12 years, the room fell silent when he entered. Not because they didn't know him, but because they did. "Doc Briggs," an old man said, rising slowly from a seat near the bar. "That you?" "Yeah," Malcolm nodded. "It's me." They stood, one by one. Vietnam vets, Gulf War soldiers, a few fresh from Iraq and Afghanistan. One by one, they walked over and clasped his hand, or hugged him without words. No one asked why he stayed away so long. They all understood. Back at the station, SKT, Kowalski called a meeting. "We nearly pulled the trigger on a man who saved more lives in 1 year than most of us will in a lifetime," he said, looking around the room. "And the only reason we didn't is because he said a name, our brother's name. That's not okay. We have to be better before another call sign is all that saves someone." He paused, holding up a small item, a patch, dusty and faded, embroidered with the medic symbol and the words "Doc Briggs, Echo 90 for below it. "I spoke to the captain. We're making some changes. First, we're adding a new training module, community veteran recognition. Second, I'm inviting Malcolm Briggs to speak here, not just as a vet, as a teacher." Malcolm was reluctant at first, but after a few conversations, he agreed. On the day he arrived at the precinct, he wore his same old hoodie, the one that once made 3 guns raise in fear. But this time, the room stood as he walked in, not out of protocol, but out of respect. He told them stories, not war stories full of violence, but stories of healing under pressure, about the sound a dying man makes when he hears a friend's voice, about how sometimes the worst wounds are the ones no one can see. And at the end, he said, "I don't hate you. I feared you. That day, I thought I was going to die, not because I had a gun, but because I had my skin. But in a twist of fate, it was a white man's name, Miller, that saved me. The irony is not lost on me, but it proves this: we don't survive by sides. We survive by memory. We live when we remember each other as human." There was silence. And then, applause. Weeks passed. Malcolm continued walking home. No more flashing lights, no more drawn guns, just nods from patrol cars, sometimes even a wave. But the real change came one afternoon when he walked past a group of kids playing ball in the street. A cruiser pulled up nearby. 2 officers stepped out. "Hey, fellas," one said. "You know who this man is?" The kids shook their heads. "That's Doc Briggs. He's a war hero. Saved a lot of lives." The kids looked up at Malcolm wide-eyed. One of them asked, "Were you really in a war?" Malcolm smiled. "Still am, kid. But now I fight it with kindness." And just like that, the neighborhood, his neighborhood, felt a little safer, a little kinder, a little more aware, because one whisper had echoed louder than any bullet ever could. Chat said, a few months later, the story of Malcolm Briggs quietly reached beyond Charlotte. At first, it was just a local write-up on the police department's community blog, titled "The Whisper That Changed Us," but it went viral overnight, shared on veteran forums, community pages, and eventually picked up by national outlets. The story struck a nerve across America. CNN called it a moment of redemption. The New York Times ran a headline, "From Target to Teacher: How One Black Veteran Rewired a Police Force," and the Today Show asked for an interview. Malcolm politely declined. He didn't want fame. He wanted progress. Then came the call from Washington, D.C. It was a direct line from the Department of Defense. "Mr. Briggs, we'd like to invite you to speak at the National Veterans Memorial this November. There's someone here who specifically requested you." The voice on the other end belonged to General Eileen Rivers, the first black woman to lead the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She had served in Afghanistan too. She had heard the whispers about Doc Briggs even before this story exploded, and she wanted America to hear them at the memorial ceremony, under an overcast sky. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder. Every branch of the military was represented. News crews lined the outskirts, but the focus remained on the makeshift podium set beneath a row of American flags. Malcolm stood quietly in front of the crowd, his dog tags visible, his hands at ease. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he began, his voice steady. Not just because of war, but because of a moment on a street corner in my own country. I thought that day might be my last. Instead, it became the start of something new. He scanned the crowd, seeing hundreds of faces, soldiers, officers, families, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes. I was saved that day. By the name of a white soldier I bled beside in war. But let me be clear, it wasn't the name that saved me. It was what we shared in that war. Pain, purpose, brotherhood. That's what turned fear into recognition. He paused, letting it sink in. If we can remember that we once carried each other through hell, then maybe, just maybe, we can carry each other through this country, too. There was no dry eye when he finished. Even General Rivers stepped forward and embraced him publicly. After that, Malcolm began working directly with both the Department of Veterans Affairs and National Police. Training programs. He created a program called Echo 94, teaching trauma-informed response, cultural humility, and veteran recognition. It was adopted by 6 states within a year. Over 40 precincts had hosted Malcolm for in-person sessions. But the most meaningful moment came one winter morning, when he was approached by a young officer in training. "You probably don't remember me," the young man said nervously. "I'm Anthony Miller. Sergeant Daniel Miller was my dad." Malcolm's breath caught. "I was too young to remember him," Anthony continued. "But I've heard about you since I was a kid. I joined the academy because of you." Malcolm stared at him, then stepped forward and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "He would be proud, son. Just promise me you'll never forget who you are, and who others might be." Today, at a community center just outside Charlotte, there's a mural dot. It shows 2 men, one black, one white, both in combat fatigues, their backs pressed together, weapons lowered. Above them, the words, "Brothers in battle, humans in peace." Beneath the mural is a simple plaque in honor of Malcolm Briggs and Sergeant Daniel Miller, who showed us that sometimes the strongest weapon is a name spoken in truth. And in that neighborhood, whenever someone says Echo 94, it doesn't mean danger anymore. It means reminder, a reminder of where we've been, a reminder of what we owe, and a reminder that one whisper of humanity can echo across a nation. The years passed, but Malcolm Briggs remained a living symbol, not just of a man who survived, but of a man who transformed. His work with the Echo 94 program led him to schools, prisons, police academies, and even corporate boardrooms. He wasn't a preacher or politician. He was something rarer, a listener. He taught police officers how to read trauma, not posture. He taught CEOs that real leadership means sitting with discomfort. He taught kids in poor neighborhoods that survival isn't shameful, it's proof. And still, he never asked for a medal. But recognition came anyway. The Presidential Medal of Freedom. Malcolm never expected the letter. It came one fall morning, delivered by hand, stamped with the seal of the United States. He stared at it for a long time, unsure what to do. The ceremony would be televised. He didn't like attention, but it wasn't for him. He decided it was for every Doc Briggs who never got to come home. At the White House, he stood alongside decorated veterans, activists, scientists, and teachers. When the president placed the medal around his neck, Malcolm said only one sentence into the mic: "I accept this for those who never had the chance to speak before a bullet did." The room erupted in a standing ovation. Later that night, in his quiet apartment, Malcolm sat alone, medal in hand, staring at an old photograph. Sergeant Daniel Miller, grinning, arm around him, dirt smeared on both their faces. "Kandahar, 2010, still watching out for me," Malcolm murmured. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and stepped out into the night. His neighborhood had changed. Murals on buildings, community patrols, after-school programs. People greeted him by name. Some called him Doc. Kids waved from porches. No one crossed the street to avoid him anymore. But Malcolm never let the past go. He wore it like a second skin. And sometimes when he walked alone down Kennedy Street, he could almost hear it, Echo 94. Freedom Hill. 2 years later, at the Charlotte Veterans Memorial, a new statue was unveiled. It depicted 2 men side by side, one in fatigues, the other in a hoodie with a stethoscope draped around his neck. Below the figures, etched in stone, were the words, "He saved lives in a war zone, then came home and saved hearts in his own." The mayor spoke, so did the governor, but the final words were given to Anthony Miller, now a decorated officer himself. "I never met my father," Anthony said to the crowd, "but I met his brother, and that brother taught me what strength really looks like. Not fists, not guns, but grace, the kind that stands calmly when 3 barrels are pointed at you, and whispers the name of the man who made you believe peace was possible." He looked out at the crowd, then to Malcolm, now sitting in the front row, silent and proud. Echo 94 isn't just a call sign, Anthony said. It's a lesson, a warning, a promise. And thanks to Malcolm Briggs, it's a legacy. As the crowd stood and clapped, Malcolm smiled softly. He didn't wave. He didn't bow. He just sat back and whispered something only he could hear. "We made it, brother." In the years that followed, Malcolm Briggs' legacy became more than remembrance. It became movement, inspired by Echo 94. Cities across the country began adapting similar programs. What started as trauma-informed policing workshops evolved into full community initiatives. Peer-led street mediation, veteran-student mentorships, officer shadowing in inner-city schools. And at the heart of it all, even when he wasn't there, in person, people invoked the name Malcolm Briggs like a compass, but Malcolm remained grounded. He still lived in the same modest apartment, still shopped at the corner market where, years earlier, guns were drawn on him for looking like someone suspicious. Except now, the cashier shook his hand, the patrol car parked outside offered a respectful nod, and the local kids, they asked him for homework help or advice about life. Then came a call from an unexpected place, the Pentagon. They wanted to commission him, not as a soldier, but as a strategic advisor on community reintegration for post-conflict veterans. It was the first position of its kind. Malcolm hesitated. "I left the battlefield a long time ago," he said. A young colonel responded, "That's exactly why we need you. You didn't leave the war. You changed the terms of peace." He accepted the position under one condition, that he could keep mentoring at-risk youth. Every Thursday evening, he returned to the rec center in Charlotte, where a small group of teenagers, kids who'd seen more than most adults, would gather around and listen. One boy, Malik, had a quick temper and a history of skipping class. He rarely spoke, until one night he stayed behind and asked quietly, "You ever feel like you can't escape what they already think you are?" Malcolm sat with him for an hour. "I've walked into rooms where I was the threat, the suspect, the statistic, all before I said a word," he said. "But I never let them write my story. I took the pen back. That's what you're gonna do." Later that year, Malik gave the valedictorian speech at his high school. He ended it with, "This diploma isn't just mine. It's for every kid who's ever been mistaken for a threat. It's for Doc Briggs, the man who gave me the pen." In his 70s, Malcolm finally retired. He didn't have to announce it. The community just noticed that his Thursdays were a little quieter. But one afternoon, a special ceremony was held at the University of North Carolina. They renamed the Department of Social Justice and Conflict Resolution to the Malcolm Briggs Center for Peace Building and Public Safety. There was no big speech, just a few words from Malcolm. "The real heroes are the ones you'll never see on the news. They're the kids who didn't pick up the gun, the cop who asked a second question, the neighbor who made a call instead of a judgment. That's peace. Not perfect, but possible." One final time, Malcolm visited the statue of him and Sergeant Miller. He sat beside it, older now, slower, but sharp as ever. He carried with him a folded flag and a single white rose. A little girl, no older than 7, walked by with her mother. She pointed at the statue. "Mommy, who's that?" Her mother smiled and replied, "That's the man who whispered peace loud enough for the world to hear." The little girl looked at Malcolm, then at the statue. She walked over and placed a sticker on the base. It was a heart, hand-drawn in crayon, and Malcolm Briggs, for the first time in a long time. Let a tear fall, not for the war, not for the pain, but because even the smallest voices now carried an echo. Echo 94, always remembered, never silenced. 10. Years later, Malcolm Briggs passed away quietly, surrounded by loved ones in a hospice not far from where it all began, Charlotte. He was 81. The news of his death sent a deep and immediate ripple through the nation. But what followed was unlike anything anyone expected. A national day of recognition by unanimous vote. Congress declared the date of Malcolm's passing, June 18th, as Echo Day. On this day, schools across the country now hold moments of silence, not just for fallen soldiers, but for reconciliation, for every person who carried a burden, survived judgment, or chose peace over retaliation. Police academies in all 50 states added Echo 9 for case studies to their first-year training. New recruits are required to study not just law, but legacy. And that legacy begins with 5 whispered words. Echo 9-4, Freedom Hill. The Legacy Foundation. Malik, the once troubled teen turned valedictorian, now respected civil rights attorney, helped launch the Briggs Miller Legacy Foundation. Its mission: to fund scholarships for veterans' children, provide counseling for those suffering PTSD, and train officers in restorative justice. They opened centers in Charlotte, Atlanta, Detroit, and Oakland. Plans for an international program followed, with partnerships in conflict zones to study how personal memory could aid national healing. On the wall of every legacy center is the same quote from Malcolm: "You don't erase fear with force, you disarm it with understanding." Hollywood came challenge eventually. The full story made its way to the screen. A major motion picture, call sign Echo, premiered at film festivals and swept awards season. Critics praised it not for its war scenes, but for its stillness. The power of a man whispering history into a moment of panic. An unknown actor who had once been homeless, himself a former Marine, played Malcolm. His tearful Oscar acceptance speech echoed through the chamber, to every person ever judged, before they could speak, to every soldier who made it home only to feel invisible. This story is yours too. Malcolm just showed us the path, years into the future. In a second-grade classroom in Baltimore, a young black boy sits quietly during history period. His teacher shows a photo of the Briggs Miller statue. Who were they? The boy asks. They were brothers, the teacher says, not by blood, but by choice. They protected each other in war, and one day, when a mistake almost cost everything, that brotherhood saved a life. The boy frowns. Why did they pull guns on him if he was a hero? The teacher looks him in the eye and answers, because sometimes the world forgets. That's why we remember. Outside, in front of the school, there's a mural with bright colors and bold lines, kids of all races, and backgrounds standing shoulder to shoulder, hands on hearts. Behind the figure of a man in a hoodie, whispering into the wind. At the bottom, in glowing paint, whispers can change the world. And somewhere, long beyond time, in a place where there are no more wars, no more borders, no more uniforms or colors to divide, 2 men stand side by side again. Sergeant Daniel Miller and Malcolm Briggs. They don't need to speak, because Echo 9-4 is now eternal. Years from now, the world may forget headlines, controversies, and noise, but it will remember stories. And the story of Malcolm Briggs endures, because it was never about perfection. It was about a man who turned a loaded moment into a lesson, a whisper into a war cry for peace, and a name into a bridge that outlived the battlefield. His legacy wasn't carved in marble. It was etched in every heart that chose empathy over instinct, understanding over fear. Because Malcolm Briggs didn't just survive injustice, he redeemed it. And so when a child asks, what does Echo 9-4 mean? The answer will come not with fanfare, but with reverence. It means a whisper once stopped a bullet. It means one man remembered a name, and the world remembered him. It means peace is louder than fear, if someone dares to speak it first. Echo 9-4. Always remembered. Never silenced. Forever echoed.